Coaches and affiliate owners, we are super excited to launch our FitFilliate Founders League. It is hosted over on the school platform, and you'll find a link in the show notes or a link in our bio over on Instagram. This is a group where there will be higher level conversation, higher level thinking, critical thinking, creative thinking, a little bit of fun, but the end game is everybody is helping everybody else be better. So I'll see you over there. And welcome back to our next episode of the FitFilliate Podcast. And whilst we don't have our faithful cohort Andrew with us today, I'm super excited to chat one-on-one with Tony today. It's been so long.
Yes, it has. And I'm joined by my ever enthusiastic and present co-host, Lisa, from her prison island.
From my prison island, yeah. I thought you were going to say something about your treadmill then, but there you go. I got to mention. So
I am still on my way to nowhere, guys. In case anybody's wondering, nope, still have not arrived. Don't know where I'm going. Just enjoying the journey.
I feel
like
you
guys who don't know, just so we're clear, it's the only outlet for my ADD. It's either this or I sit on the bike, and that's just bad for the old prostate for that long. So here we are walking.
Here we go again. You know, if you were like a true hardcore CrossFitter in game season, you'd be on your treadmill in your Go Ruck right now, just, you know, powering through. Like the people that get on there.
That, actually, as a matter of fact, because I do have, there's a 100-pound one over there, backpack. The issue that I have is that this treadmill is rated 225 pounds, and I make up 200 of that myself. So turns out I probably shouldn't do that. I think about that all the time. Like, I really would love to incorporate this into more exercise and workouts, because fun fact is, as you don't know, this is also generally always where I work out as well. And you used to see the rings hanging here. I tend to live in this little ivory tower.
Yeah. That's an apt description. It just made me think of the people who are watching the Tour de France and they're on their Peloton bikes or whatever, and they're pedaling away and make it harder when they go up the hills and stuff. So, you know,
I do think that that's so cool though. And I in the gym, we used to have FTP trainers. So we had this big indoor cycling thing. We had a big bike shop at the gym, and FTP it was always been a big thing in cycling, but around Tour de France and around big cycling events, people would become moderately interested, because you would see the wattage in the power output of these people, but you'd have no frame of reference. So it was always fun to put people on those bikes and then watch them be like, oh yeah, it's just riding a bike. And then they're like, what? They can, drugs. It's gotta be drugs.
That's why I love, it's gone viral at the moment, you know, the posts on the Instagram reels about people who are like, sadly, I was not selected to represent whatever country in the Paris Olympics, and some fail of them. 90% are doing gymnastics. But I love the fact that people, when there's a big event on, particularly the Olympics every 4 years, people are like suddenly an armchair expert on these random random sports like handball that they never ever watch. They're like, no, I definitely wouldn't have made that pass, or I wouldn't have thrown like that.
Totally.
And they're
I think
completely.
I've always loved the Olympics is for that exact reason, right? It's like every couple of years there becomes more so in the Summer Olympics and the Winter Olympics, I think, unfortunately, because like there's some cool sports in the Winter Olympics, but like, you know, people aren't as apt to try to go out and do something new in the snow. But what is fun is to watch people, like you said, give otherwise fringe sports the attention that they deserve, for the attention that they deserve, as opposed to like these just weird Olympic sports. But like, I think ultimately a lot of people end up with a collective awareness of, sounds bad, like just how far from humanity they've fallen. Right? Like, it's like, especially gymnastics. Like, I think it's comical to watch everybody attempt to do a gymnastics routine on like the fence posts, right? And like do all those things. But like, I think you have to, it's even cooler when you understand the point of gymnastics as a sport is human movement perfected. Like, that's essentially it. The absolute pinnacle of human capability in terms of human movement, essentially behavior. I think you'll get me to nerd out on this one. And so the entire sport is a literal objective measurement, although it's a subjective sport, of how far from perfect you can be, right? So like even those athletes that they're trying to emulate are attempting to quote unquote achieve perfection. But at the end of the day, really all it is like how good of a human are you in terms of movement? That's essentially the sport of gymnastics. And so it's not lost on me, but maybe it's lost on everybody else, is that when they comically produce these videos, what they're actually producing is that, like, I'm a terrible human.
Yeah. I'm a long way from the kernel. It's and we were watching the speed bouldering the other night, which is not a fringe sport really, but book climbing's huge. And one girl, she couldn't get past the first thing on each of these challenges. But we're talking about she must clearly have a lot of skill to even have made it to the Olympics, let alone, and then by the time you got to see the climbers who just straight up, you're like, that's the difference. And it was just really interesting to watch and to be able to sit from the comfort of the couch, go, oh no, I wouldn't have made that grab. You got to face the other way for that grab. Like, I mean, really, it's like, go and look at that wall and look at the angles and go, like, how would that be? But we're not here to talk about the Olympics or the games or you walking today, which is where it started. It takes us down a path.
My Olympic sport that I do all by myself. Got a gold medal.
You're not quite doing the right motion for the speed walking, so that's
turns out you can only see from here up, but below me it's a whole party going on.
That's a whole other conversation.
The hips are swiveling.
Well, speaking of party going on, a topic I want to talk about today is for us to expand on a topic that you posted in our Fit League Founders group in school, which is a visionary, a leader, a manager walk into a bar. What happens? What's most important? And I really liked that topic, but it dawned on me as I was reading through it and seeing that it was a bit scant for sort of replies, and even when I put a reply in there, I really had to think hard on what's my definition of a visionary, a leader, and a manager. Are they one and the same? And I thought it would be good because I think widely that's a misconception as well, that maybe a manager is a visionary, or, when we're talking about a company structure and what's actually needed for a company to innovate and thrive.
For the record, Lisa's only response in there was that if we walk into the bar, you're buying drinks. So that's as far as her brain went into that topic. So,
and I think yours was that if we walk in, we're not walking out. So
I just meant staying, but you took that as a part. I'm just kidding. Well, so that topic actually was inspired from a conversation that came out of a coaching call with another client. I won't share his call, but and it got me really kind of thinking, because he's in a really cool series of life or sequence of life in business, in terms of like, got a lot of right people in the right seats, right who's for the house, etc. But was faced with, at first, what appeared to be an unfortunate exit, I suppose, by a team member. But upon further discussion or exploration, I challenged him whether or not it was unfortunate or if it was a positive. And yes, losing a team member can be positive, especially when it was the values of the business that repelled the person. And I don't necessarily mean in terms of like gross them out, but their inability to ever fit in terms of how things were operating. And so that was kind of the impetus of the conversation, what started it, in terms of like, I wagered that a more effective KPI of team development might be number of people who have left the organization rather than number of people who continue to be engaged in the organization, which would probably seem very counterintuitive. But the reason that I say that is that if a company is not if it's terrible, but if the company's operating really well and people are leaving it for personal reasons, I would say that you have values intact. Whether your values are good or bad, that's a whole different conversation. But I think it's an incredibly valuable place to be, possibly use the word value, to be in business when your values, both good or otherwise, are driving the ship, because that's not usually the case. What normally happens in 99% of the gyms, yes, anecdotal number that I just made up. Reactivity drives the business, right? Like, I had another client the same day. Things are going super well, like, amazingly well, but they got a couple big life things, right? New member of the family is arriving soon, and then another member of the family needed a surgery, and that immediately, for no real reason, but a logical one nonetheless, not an irrational one, sent them into a tailspin of panic of being like, wow, that was an unexpected quote unquote $10,000 bill. And like, that mouth is expensive. That's coming, right? Like, and, and despite the fact that by all the numbers and by all the trajectories, they are absolutely fine. They showed up being like, here, so what do you think we should, and they want to change everything, right? Like they want to react. And, once you calm them down, you say, this problem, are you making it one? And you start to lay out the facts and the details. You're like, but you can still see in them, like they want something to react to so they can express control over an otherwise uncontrollable situation. And they like everybody start to poke things and pop things. And that's, I guess, not that uncommon either. And that's kind of what brings us to this conversation, because what ends up happening in any business is there's a life cycle. I think most people know business life cycles is like startup, shutdown, right? Or like success in the middle, but they do all go through, seasons of life, so to speak. But there's, no matter what the business, no matter what the industry, there's three key players that always have to exist. Much more commonly, of course, or I wouldn't say commonly, but much more identifiably, publicly observably in what we'll call blue ocean businesses versus red ocean ones, because the very nature of a red ocean business is a line item extension, right? So they don't really need a whole lot of these three, but the three being a visionary, a leader, and a manager. And they're not new words. They're words that have been thrown on this podcast a bunch of times, but in those conversations, and then thinking back and reflecting on other conversations, and then, through my own experience and my own struggles, thinking about the ubiquity of those words in business, the misappropriation of those words in business, and the misunderstanding of those words in business, I think could really cause a lot of suffering, and for that matter, cure a lot of suffering in terms of like who does what, when they do it, and how they do it, and who should be doing it. I think would save a lot of people a lot of problems, because you kind of said it already. More often than not, most businesses, it's like that Scooby-Doo meme, right? He pulls up the same mask and it's him underneath it, right? You're the same person across the board. But that's a problem, right? And so I think it could help them.
And I think that people, can get a little bit caught up in that. They think that a visionary and a leader are one and the same, because to call yourself a visionary as its own, as a standalone kind of role or function, because as you said so eloquently in our email blast that went out yesterday, is like, as humans, we've lost the ability to dream. And it feels like if someone said to you, well, what do you do in the company? Well, I'm the visionary. Like, someone would look at you and go, mate, get your hand off it. Like, have you got a real job? Yeah. And that's not a real job. But I think if we can understand how critical that is, and as a role, whether it's a standalone or someone separate, but, that's what, gives life to a dream and has the dream, and then also is able to turn it into something that people want to get behind.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up too, because it is for sure. I mean, as somebody who is the visionary, and it has always been a visionary, it's definitely one of the, like, even my life's big struggles is like, I feel like Count Chocula or Peter Pan most days, right? Like, everybody in my life is like, what do you do? So much so that I've actually settled on just telling people that I'm retired, because everybody's version or idea of retirement is doing what they want, when they want, where they want, with who they want. And like, but that's exactly how my life is designed. So I'm like, I fit into your mold of retirement much more than I fit into your mold of like existential angst and suffering, what you call employment. So, yeah. And I do think that people, it's ironic, right? Where it's like visionaries are celebrated. The Elon Musks and the Zucker Bezoses of the world, like they become these lauded figures, these, and even historical ones. You've got like Rockefeller and Carnegie, and these people who they become these quote unquote, to use Discovery Channel's own words, titans of industry, right? Like these people. Fun fact, Titan's not actually really a great word in mythology. Great book. You should read Mythos. Thanks, Nicole Carroll. She got me to read that book, but complete sidebar there. We put these people on platforms and pedestals and worship them as like, wow, these amazing figures and quote unquote changing the world, right? By getting us to spend more money, but that's a different conversation. But what's funny about that is that in the beginning, you're Peter Pan, right? Like, okay, whatever, we know, right? But then all of a sudden you hit success. It's like, it's as cliche as anything, right? Like everybody wants to be against you until you've made it, then they want to ride your coattails, and it's the same thing. And I think that spurs a lot of the struggle with it, but the rest of it spurs a misunderstanding of the importance and the necessity inside a business. And I think visionary has become, I think Gino Wickman gets all the credit that he deserves for titling that term, because I don't really think until EOS and Traction and Rocket Fuel and those books came out was there so pinnacled an identity that it was, this is what this person does. Because I think what you'll see, and you see it a lot in titles, visionary leader, right? Like you see these co-mingling of those two words. And so aren't they the same? I think the answer you would probably say would be, yeah, but they're not.
Particularly when people identify that it's a leader who gets everyone on board to follow them. Well, they're a leader because I'm following.
Yeah.
But that's, the way that, when you really insert that role of visionary at the top of the tree, it becomes very clear then when you look at the levels that need to go below it. And, apart from encouraging you to buy the drinks at the bar, my take on it was that the visionary, has the mission and communicates it in a way that gets a leader to get behind them, who's going to then rally the troops and build the army for the mission. And then your manager is going to go strategically deploy those troops to make sure the mission is executed. They're down there at the doing level, but the visionary is not down there. If the visionary comes down and starts trying to strategically organize the troops, it's not going to work real well. And if it's you in a business who's swapping between all three hats, it's very hard for other people who are working with you and for you to figure out, what it is that you're doing. It might seem like you're some sort of schizophrenic kitten bouncing off the walls, and they're not knowing, well, what are you going to do next? Because you're stuck between roles and positions and what's your natural mode of operating, and you don't know what to do.
Well, first of all, I feel very targeted by the tone of your you when saying that. And maybe I happen to identify as a schizophrenic kitten, more so a puppy. I think definition speaking, a visionary's job is to creatively solve problems in the world. That's it. A leader's job is to inspire people to follow them, to be somebody worth following. And a manager's job is to execute. That's it. Right? Those three things are essentially their sort of core focuses. And I think it's important to highlight those, because more often than not, there is an intermingling of them, mainly in the startup phase. No doubt about it. You do find yourself in the unfortunate situation of having to play the role of all three. And I would start first and foremost by saying that, 86% of all businesses are red ocean, and that they lack a visionary. They don't have one. And so it might stand to reason that a visionary is an elective personality, identity, role inside a business. Could be true. If your only aspiration was to quote unquote build a carbon copy. And we know that to be true anecdotally, but we know it to be true inside the affiliate landscape that most affiliates, truly most, the average, do not want to be unique. They just want to be simple. They want to be carbon copies of each other so they don't have to think, but they don't want to have to be visionaries. They don't want to have to be creative. They don't want to think differently about the use of the methodology. They don't want to have to solve problems, create unique identities, visions, missions, and whys, right? I know this because I screen them on every call and they're like, huh? No. Can you just tell me what to do? Nope, out. Right? Like, you got to go, right? Because like there's no shortage of resources for red ocean affiliates. In fact, there's so many, it's pulling people out of the blue ocean back to it. Now it's my job as like the lifeguard to jump into the stupid red ocean and pull people back to the blue one. But so most businesses don't really have a visionary, not because they don't necessarily have one in there, but if your idea of your business model is to replicate someone else's business model, you already marginalize the existence of a creative, which is a visionary. However, we've talked before about how much money the blue ocean businesses make versus the red ocean businesses. And one of the reasons that they do that is that the length of time that a blue ocean business can continue to play the infinite game is exceptionally longer than the commoditized game of the red ocean businesses. The only reason to become a red ocean business is to get in, cash out, and get out, which is ironic, right? Because that's not what any of the affiliates are doing. Right? They don't want to get in to cash out. You would get into a McDonald's, standardized profit, like get it, cash out. And it doesn't mean you got to dump it, but you would just stick it over there. I'm going to leave it alone. But they all want to run their affiliate creatively, importantly, egotistically, right? But yet they operate 100% with the intention of becoming a red ocean. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that people confuse creativity and inspiration, right? Because in order to be a blue ocean business, you must innovate, right? To be a business in general, you should be innovating because that's just how the markets move. But innovation requires creativity. Creativity requires abundance, right? And once creativity and an abundance have been in place, like innovation is possible. But it's through that innovation that a future can come to exist. Right? Like this ideal version, vision, concept of, either what the business is going to achieve or what it's working towards. It's from that narrative that inspiration can occur. It's from that narrative that a person, a leader, can come in, crystallize that innovation, and turn it into inspiration and get people to follow them. More often than not, that's very easy for a visionary to do, right? Because it's their baby, right? They came up with this idea. So they're really, really good at putting it into words. They're really good at giving those words to people to inspire them. But here's where a visionary fails. A visionary is completely and totally disarmed when it comes time to delegate. Because if it goes well, they love it. But as soon as it gets into any minutia of orders, mission, tactics, strategy, etc., a visionary just basically goes, "Were you just born with it? Like, it's just go do it." Like, I would just go do it. And a visionary in most cases can go do the very thing that they created. This is why they get stuck there, right? Because you get this great idea and you end up putting yourself on this lily pad of one, right? You can't get anybody else to help you. You get lots of people to jump on, but then they get on and they're like, "This dude has lost his mind." And they just jump off, right? Because like they can't find a place. So the leader has to put action to vision, right? And so it's their job to bring things into inspiration. And then it's their job to attract the attention of a manager, right? And so more often than not, the other thing that you see missing in most businesses is then a strategic manager, right? This tactician, general, this operator. And the reason for that is that visionaries often operate as leaders, and they can't communicate at all with a manager. And more often than not, they literally repulse them. Like a manager is completely and totally disgusted with most visionaries, right? Because they're just like, how on earth do you think this is ever going to happen? Right? And they're just like, I know it's going to happen. They're like, what?
Yeah. Do you not understand the details?
There's got to be a person in the middle who's like, love it. Here's what I think it looks like. And then a manager's like, oh, I could crush that. Yeah, I would absolutely smash that. And so when you find yourself absent of somebody to like lead the execution charge, it's pretty clear. You haven't inspired executors to follow you. You might have, inspired some zealots and some freeloaders and some cohorts and some people who just like you because you're a jovial person and you're easy to follow. But like the degree to which you can attract the people that you need is also a very important but often not communicated part of being a good leader. Like to be a leader is simply your ability to be somebody worth following. That makes you quote unquote a leader. But then to become a good leader, it's your ability to attract the people that you need to advance the mission, right? And if you find yourself unable to advance or failing at the mission, it's clearly that you haven't attracted the right people through your inspiration yet, which just means that like it needs to be chopped up. But those three people need to exist, and they get confused, right? People think that they're all one and the same.
And it's really hard to get behind something that seems scattered and confused, because as humans, we want consistency, we want, reassurance, we want stability. So when something is sort of pinging from one wall to the other and it's hot and cold and it's very hard to go all in and say, this is what I want to get behind, this is what I believe in.
Yeah.
And when the visionary does, you mentioned an important point before, that the visionary goes, well, this is my baby. And they start being involved in areas which the visionaries really shouldn't touch. Then things become, and they don't want to give up that control, because if you don't have someone who in that middle, that leader who's going to communicate, here's what it might look like, so then your executor can go, yep, I can crush that. The executor is not going to do necessarily, or they're going to take what the visionary said and go, okay, this is what I think it should be. Then the visionary is going to step in and go, well, hang on a minute, that's not what I wanted. That's not what it looks like. And then suddenly we have this conflict.
Yeah, I think, to that point, we've talked about it a little bit on here before, just in terms of like the day you decide to go into business, it's no longer about you. But as we know to be true, and you probably know listening to this, like feels pretty personal. Well, that in and of itself is the first problem that's got to be fixed. It's not personal. And in fact, if you continue to feel being personal, it's because you're making it personal. And that's what's actually holding back the business. As soon as you release it from your own individual identity and your own success, failure, otherwise, things are going to be a lot better for you. That aside, the day you go into business, the clock starts and it's a race, because when you're a visionary and you show up at the starting line, the gun goes off, you leave the blocks, you come forth with this great vision, this idea, this masterpiece, so to speak. It is a sprint to find the leader, to attract the leader. And then you pass the baton. And then it is a sprint for the leader to pass the baton to the manager. And then it is a sprint for them to finish the race and pass the baton to the team and the clients and the customers. Because here's what happens. Most people hear the gun, they leave the blocks, and they just run the other direction. If they run at all, they probably will start walking forward. And what ends up happening is that they sit in the visionary position for too long, right? And they don't attract the leader, right? And then the visionary is left to play this role that is already stacked against them. And it's not to say that it's impossible to do. because there are great examples of it where it's happened. It's just they're few and far between. Generally speaking, the averages suggest that visionaries are very inspirational. They're just not very actionable, right? And so this is why, everybody's got the uncle who's got all the bright ideas, but he's never put anything into action. You at least, brought something forward. Now it's a race to get somebody to be the leader. That might mean you got a conflict because you don't actually have a bright idea, right? Maybe you just want to be a carbon copy. That means you immediately have to renounce the position of visionary and get to leader, which means you need to spend your time figuring out exactly what it is you're trying to copy. And I don't mean ops, processes, procedures. I mean, what is the overarching mission, vision, and values of this thing you're trying to copy and attach to? Then you can become a leader of a red ocean business. But a business is going to need to have it because you are the owner. You are the person, no matter what, copy or otherwise, that people are going to look to be like, well, what are we doing here? Right? And if you can't communicate that, articulate that, they're going to go someplace else looking for a leader. And that might mean even to a different industry. I don't mean another gym as a competitor.
No. But so what do we do then if you realize that you aren't really a visionary, but you're, this is your line that you've invested in and you're going to ride this line, but you're not the person for that seat to take it forward? What do you do then? If you go,
Hold
well,
on,
actually,
I'll make it even more confusing for you because there's another race. So that's the first race. The second race is that as soon as you've passed that baton to the leader, the clock starts, you've got to kill the visionary. Most businesses struggle from an over-present, over-existent, omnipresent visionary. Because here's the great thing about a visionary. They're great at creative problem solving and solutions. Once the leader gets inspiration and the manager starts getting into execution, you have to marginalize the visionary. Why? Because they'll never stop trying to grow the business. And I don't mean like in a good way. They'll grow like cancer. They'll be putting tumors all over this thing, being like, we should try this. We should do this. We should do that. You got to get a visionary quiet. This is why most businesses need to sell, right? Because you have the easiest way to do that is let the visionary on to the next project, right? And so we see a lot of conflict in a lot of businesses, not just affiliates, but in a lot of businesses where visionaries linger because they have created something and it is working. And there's never a shortage of problems to creatively solve for, right? And so, but on top of that, despite all their creativity, they have a hard time figuring out how to replicate it and do what's next. And so they just try to continue to morph this thing into many different things. It turns into like a multi-headed hydra, right? And like, unfortunately, the more that the leader cuts off one of those heads, what happens? And more grow back, right? And they end up with this incredibly complex company. And so while a visionary can make this really, really valuable idea that a leader can help bring to reality and a manager can bring to execution, if you don't marginalize the visionary ASAP, they will grow this thing into this incredibly complex fractal of a business that is absolutely worth nothing.
Out of control.
To anybody.
And it's, it's hard for people to wrap their head around that concept of, well, I need to keep creating things. We've talked here, we've talked on this podcast numerous times about, when people get bored or they feel like that don't have something going on with them in the business, they'll create a problem. They'll create complexity because it works for them. And when you realize that maybe if you're the visionary, that, you are not the person to take the company to the next step, because the next step is not necessarily by adding more things. So it's going to need a different set of eyes to do that. But that's where people then, the ego comes in and the attachment to it's my baby, I created this, to also then either being able to go, well, I need to exit, or find a way to shut things down for a while at the visionary level.
One of the big universal existential crises of business is there's no place for self-importance.
Mm.
Right. And like, that's what a glorious irony that is, because when people think of business, they think of business owners, and what they think of these gilded figures that, you know, drive around in these cars and these lifestyles and these things. And it's like, how do you not want to be that? Well, the secret is that you get to that by getting rid of wanting to be that. Well, that's ironic, right? That doesn't seem to make any sense, but it's the truth, right? When it comes to business, the big struggle, the eternal struggle, is man's search for meaning. Okay? Business owners try, posit, question, challenge, create, insert whatever word you want in here, any way that they can to self-validate. And I think for anybody listening to this, you'd be like, I would never do that. If my business was going really, really well, I would never get in the way. You're wrong. And that's exactly why FitFilliate was built the way that it is, because that is the problem. Like, there is no amount, and it was the conversation today that I put in that school group, which was essentially character skills versus, you know, cognitive skills. We all think that logically, cognitively, consciously, we're absolutely in control of this party. No, you're not. Subconsciously, the amount of things and ideas that you will pull off with no idea that you even pulled them off, to somebody on the outside, you'd be like, what were, oh, you weren't thinking. I get it. So anyway, the point is that those three people have to exist, but they can't really ever exist in the same space for very long. And if you notice across all of those positions, none of them talk about the person. I think people love to think about leaders as these individuals, like, but a great leader immediately renounces their sense of self. It's their ability to be somebody worth following. So that seems like, oh, must be somebody important or somebody of that nature, right? But like, what makes a good leader is not somebody's ability to articulate experience, mastery, or lessons. It's their ability to pull forth potential from other people. That doesn't say anything about you as the leader, just your ability to not think about yourself and what you bring to the equation, but instead consider what everybody else is bringing to the equation. And that's the dichotomy of leadership that most people get, even the people who are quote unquote masters of leadership will get wrong.
And it's interesting that you say that, you know, it's not about the self, but I think as a society, we've also made it that way. So for example, like when, you know, Steve Jobs got sick, Apple shares dropped because they're like, well, if there's no Steve Jobs, there's no Apple. You know, when there was talk about Bezos selling out of, you know, Amazon and whatever, and the share market dropped in those companies. So when the big, you know, the figurehead at the top looks to be changing or moving, then everyone's like, but it won't exist without them. But we have to understand that it needs to exist without them and have a new person a new person taking that spot in order to continue to innovate and evolve.
One of the more fascinating and challenging things I had to experience in my own personal life was I was given an opportunity, as most of you guys know, to travel the world and teach seminars to rooms full of people across the planet. And my origin story in CrossFit was immediately drawn to that, more so than anything else. I wanted to be on seminar staff. And so by all accounts, that specific SME, to be fair, which was gymnastics. And by all accounts, once that happened, I was quote unquote a success. But what I was not prepared for was how much I was personally going to need to fight to keep myself off of people's pedestals they would try to put me on. Right? Like, because when you show up to a seminar and there's 30, 40, 50, in those days, sometimes 60 people in the room, and you're the sole figure for 16 hours changing their life, they damn near worship you. And so one of the biggest challenges of developing that team, and I get asked a lot about that, like, was preventing them from stepping into that toxicity, because I watched it happen so many times where, like, a little bit happens and you're like, man, this feels good, right? And it speaks to like this urge inside you to cave to that fame and to cave to that adoration. But when that happens, what you end up doing is all of a sudden you completely kill your own growth, because now they celebrate you for who you are. But when you don't do that and you remain just another person in that room as a leader, it's about who you get to become. And so many staff members did not make the cut, got rejected, et cetera, because, I would watch them, right? They would start to build their following and try to become famous. And they could see the gilded cloth hanging there. And they're like, oh, I'm so close to being everything that I wanted. And the same happens in industry. Great visionaries have no interest in their own self-aggrandizement. They don't care. But when they get really good, look at what's happened with Elon, right? Like now he is all but essentially a god to the muskies out there, right? Like and little by little, he's becoming that person. And it's speaking to him. And you can see, as somebody who watches behavior, you can watch it change him, his mannerisms, the way he speaks to people, the thoughts that he makes, the decisions, but most importantly, the attention that he seeks, right? And like, so it's an insidious thing that like you could go back to this whole individual versus collective argument and say the boomers broke the business model because they did, right? And it's not about boomers versus millennials versus whatever. But the fact remains, the data remains that up until essentially the 70s and 80s, business was not about shareholders and individuals and board members. Business was about the value, the thing you created, what you put forth in the world, and the people like it, high five, right? People were proud of their jobs. Your job wasn't better or worse because you made more or less money. It was just you were ranked in society based on how fun your job seemed. Right? Like, we were just all proud to be a part of something. And then insert that generation, and they'll go down in history, I know it to be true, as the most selfish generation. Right? In that generation, because they didn't have the wartime struggles and famine struggles that their parents did before them. So they had everything they needed. So it quickly became about me. And then business became about me. It became about individuals. And it became about individuality in terms of what you as a person could reap and sow from that business. And then it started to attract them. They're like, wow, I want to be that. And so when it comes back to it, what you'll see is history just repeats itself, right? Like it's a long-winded response, but we'll go back to Discovery's Titans, right? Like the robber barons, the industries of Titan, Carnegie, Rockefeller, richest people to have ever lived, although they're getting closed in on. They pillaged everybody, right? Individually, then collectively, society essentially revolted, revolution happened, things changed, business became universal. They got prosperous again, individuals started to rise. Here we are again. We have the new robber barons, Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg, etc. They're the new Carnegie, they're the new Rockefeller, they're the new pillager. They will take and they will take and they will take, not because they need, but they don't know any other way except for to keep moving forward, right? And so it's until people start to understand that visionaries, leaders, and managers exist with very individual roles and responsibilities. And those roles and responsibilities, no matter what the position, is beholden to one person. That is the people. That's it, not the individual. And so business is such a struggle because we have now 30, 40 years, 50 years of this collective identity that like, I can go into business for me. But there's an easy way to stay in business, and that is to go into business for we.
And I think that that's something that's really overlooked because it's, what do I want to get out of this? What does it mean to me? And I created this, and it becomes very much, and I know as an affiliate owner, I was guilty of it. It was like, this is my thing. Everything revolves around me. If I'm not involved in everything, then everything stops and no one could do it. And this is where we get into the issues of delegating and handing off and how big and scary that can be, because it's what happens if it's not the same. And, even as owners, as you start to hand off things like more and more classes, well, what happens if people like them more than me? What happens if they like Coach Tony's classes more than mine? Like, and there's always that little sting in there. We always bring everything back to ourselves, which, you know, we keep limiting our potential because we do that, but we don't see that when we're in the middle of it or at the start of it.
And this is why, tactically, the point of this whole conversation is that it's always going to come back to character skills versus cognitive skills. You can layer on skill after skill after skill extrinsically, over and over and over again, pursuing, adding, bolting on more, trying to avoid the intrinsic problem, which is you are the constant in every single situation, right? And so if you're going to get into these positions and out of these positions, and you're going to get into, building a legacy, because that's really what it's all about. It's the answer will be character skills, and character skills meaning behavioral skills. My camera just disappeared. Speaking of behavioral skills, right? And it will be about your ability to inspire others. It will be about your ability to leave a lasting impact. This is very fun to talk about while I'm on a black screen.
Yeah.
Right. To leave a lasting impact, to leave something that people talk about, that people believe in for years and years. But how do legacies normally come about? Someone dies, right? Like that's usually how legacy happens. And whatever you have left, you get to pass off, and that's your legacy is the inheritance. And in that same conversation, same happens in business. You got to kill yourself off. It doesn't mean you need to leave it. It doesn't mean you need to be, gone from it and not proud of it. But if you continue to be the parent in the family, kids don't grow up.
But then that's when people get to that scary point of going, well, if I'm not this, then what?
That's when you know you're on the right track.
Go create something.
Get out of the way of something. If you're listening to this, you probably already created it. The problem is, you're also killing it.
Yeah. And, we talk about that, everywhere you go, there you are. And we always, have a knack for sabotaging ourselves. It's having that awareness, or having someone external to you, a coach or somebody who can help you sort of shine a light on that and understand where you are in that journey, rather than you just looking at yourself going, well, I created it. Everything revolves around me. Let's keep doing the thing.
It's all mine.
It's all mine. Awesome. Well, I think that was a good chat. One of many powerful chats we are having inside our school group, the Founders League. There is a link in the show notes if you want to be part of more high-level conversations than Killcliff versus FitAid, members not liking toilet paper, or people...
Or just continue this conversation. You can just talk about it in there.
Yeah, continue this conversation in there. Bring your thoughts to the table. Please click on the link in the show notes, or reach out to us on Instagram at FitFilliate, and we can get you squared away and into that group and help elevate your thinking. Thank you, good sir. I look forward to the next one.